Hey everybody, welcome back to another devlog video. In this one, I want to talk about damage pipelines, hit reactions, hit pipelines, weapon traces, things like that, and how I'm using those systems with Unreal Engine 5 and the Gameplay Ability System plugin to achieve really good and interesting damage results for my project so far. You know, things are always work in progress, things can be improved, but I kind of want to give you a little bit of an in-depth look about what I'm doing with damage, how I'm using it with gas, and some of the IM-GUI debugs that I created in the meantime to help me with those things, because for previous projects like Outriders, there was a lot of times where we had to debug a lot of nuanced damage issues, and so having pretty robust debugging tools to let you know what damage occurred, how it happened, the attributes and stats that influenced the final damage calculations, what that calculation was, are all pretty important when you have these kinds of games, especially when damage is as important as I want it to be for my project. So I hope you're interested in this. It's going to be kind of free form. I'm going to dive in a little bit to the code, a little bit into the project, show a little bit of examples, and hopefully you'll take some stuff away from it. Hopefully more interest in my project will come out of it. And if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. If you're new to the project is called Deck Night. And I want it to be a blend of the use of cards to activate abilities and try to blend deck building and real-time action into one. And so I thought the gameplay ability system was a good choice for that because, one, I'm very familiar with it. I launched Outriders with it. But also it's built for this type of game. You know, you grant abilities, you have stats, you can modify stats, and it works pretty seamlessly. Luckily, I'm doing single player, but it also works in multiplayer too. But enough rambling, let's jump into the project and take a look at some stuff. So the first thing I want to show off in the project is the melee and how we do melee calculations for damage and stuff like that. So I'm going to spawn a dummy guy, and I'm just going to start swinging. And now we have damage and damage numbers. And the damage color and how it reacts and behaves is based off damage types, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But just to give you a little bit more insight, I can draw you the shapes as well. So we do draw a good amount of shapes. Honestly, it might be too much, but we'll see in the end how big the shapes we want to be and how accurate we want these shapes to be, at least for the player, because for the player, we might want to be a little more lenient on these shapes and let them hit more than maybe they really should. And then for enemies, we kind of narrow it down a little bit, but you'll see the shapes and the traces, and then we get callbacks into our gameplay ability to then calculate damage. It goes through our damage execution class, which we'll also talk about a little bit later. But in general, this is the first initial hook into the damage system. So we deal the damage, we do a hit reaction, the enemy spins, pushes back, and rinse and repeat, loses health, and then eventually will die like that, bam. And with the melee trace system that I have, there's definitely more improvements that can be made because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, if we force FPS down to like 10, you'll see some mismatches in the shapes. Sometimes they're not drawn, sometimes they're drawn but not in the right locations and stuff like that. So this is a known issue that I don't know if I'll ever really want to solve, but this is something that's pretty well known. And when you do this, like these calculations on tick, obviously when you're losing frames or you get frame dips, the calculations in between each frame get mismatched. So there's ways to work around that. And that could be, you know, interpolating in between frames, the lost frames, and drawing shapes in between. And that's primarily the main way that I know of that you could do it. I just haven't done it for my project. I want to really do it. I don't know if I will need to. I'm not that good of a programmer either. So we'll see how it goes. But also, I want to show you, I believe it's on Fab. So let me just go to Fab real quick. There is a colleague that I work with who released a plugin. I believe it's just called Melee Trace or something like this. Yes, this one, Melee Trace by Robert Levitsky. I definitely recommend this one if you guys want to use melee trace systems and things like that. It's pretty robust. It works with the gameplay ability system. There's a lot of nice start and end socket position logic, and you can draw different types of shapes like lines and spheres and boxes and stuff like that. So definitely check it out, give it a like, definitely use it. It's really highly rated. It's also available on GitHub if you want to go that route. That's where my system was influenced by. I got a lot of good information from this plugin, so definitely check that out. But now that you know how we're doing the melee traces, I'll also jump in to one of the attacks. I forget the names here, so let me just type in melee. There should be, yeah, maybe melee 2. No, it's going to be, yeah, sequence 4. Let me pop this one open. So this is an air attack. So you'll see how the shapes are drawn here. It is a differentiation between how the shapes are drawn in editor versus in the game, because when you're drawing in the animation previewer, you can scrub frame by frame and you can kind of see all the shapes being drawn in that way. But let me just showcase a normal attack that we were just playing with. So this one, for example, right? So wham, kind of swings. These placements and everything have to be kind of adjusted. But overall, it works. And in the side here on the right, we have properties here. So I pull information from a data table. So the shape data comes from here. And so you can calculate the shapes here. So it's a capsule, it's radius of 30 and height of 30. Let me make sure I make this a little bit bigger for everybody just in case. But yeah, you can see some of the weapon information here, the trace socket data. And then we do get a callback in our melee base ability to then apply damage. So this is also where things will need to become more flexible over time, just because I am forcing damage of 3 here. So in the end, there's probably be information passed along in the data table as well, so the record will be able to pull from it and say, hey, it's 3 damage, hey, here's the damage result information, here's the damage type, additional granted tags and stuff like that. But in a nutshell, that's how it all kind of functions on the melee level. There's some more information here about our custom depth stencil value and our rendering custom depth. That's how we get the white shapes and the outlines when we hit the enemy. But yeah, we're going to just focus on damage today. So when it comes to melee hits, there's a couple of things that I also want to focus on. So one is when you do get a hit, do we want to have a hit reaction that makes sense to the direction that you're hitting in? So obviously, when you have a hit direction like left to right, right to left, top to bottom, bottom top, or neutral, so like pure assist and stuff like that, you could expect different types of hit reactions on enemies. So, them being hit in the proper direction and orientation. And it also can take into account, the relative direction between the two characters. So if I hit with a left to right swing from behind, they would be hit in one direction. But if I do the same attack from their left or their right, they would also translate and kind of react in a different way. Doing something like that does blow up the animation scope, so I'm not too sure if I want to do it for my project, but we'll have to see in the long run. I definitely want to see about how knockbacks can deal damage to other enemies that they hit into and kind of have cascading hit effects like that. I think that would be pretty cool, especially for like area of effects and things like that. I think that could all be pretty cool. Something else I want to talk about briefly is criticals and stuff like that. We'll jump into the code in a bit, but we have these cards that I can do modifiers for, and my card number 2 is a damage modifier. It actually does crits, so my hits can deal critical damage, and you'll see my hits are doubled. And we have the UI representing the crit as well. And then over time, the crits end. That's the end of the card, and that's how it all kind of works. And I kind of want to have a lot of interesting things about critical hits and crits applying burn. So for example, let me just restart, and I'll show you more of what I mean. So for example, we have our damage modifier, and we have a crit applies burn. So now when I hit, it now applies burn, and my burns also apply critical damage. Not sure if I want that aspect of it. I don't know if that's too OP to have burn damage also be critical, because it's a tick, damage over time instance versus just this instant damage effects, but could work out in my favor, could be interesting, who knows. And then we also have a card that turns our dodge into a ball of flame, which then burns them as well. Probably want to deal explosive fire damage on that as well in the long run. But as you can see, we have icons representing the status effect, we have an outline that represents the status effect, and we have the damage number also change color based on the status effect, and also behave and animate a little bit differently. One of the talks I saw from Tim Kane, he mentioned damage numbers and things like that. And one thing that I found interesting that he said was maybe it could be a cool aspect of damage numbers that they animate and behave based on the damage type it's representing. So, fire damage could behave more like fire and smoke, kind of angle upwards slowly. Maybe electric damage is very shaky Snow damage can maybe fall a little, like ice damage can fall slowly, representing snow. So I'm kind of going that route. Right now, fire and burn is the only kind of damage and status effects that I have in the project, but soon we'll add more. And I think now that I've kind of beaten this guy up a little bit, and I think I did critical damage, I think now's a good time to show you my IamGUI debug. So if I pull up my IamGUI command, I have damage pipeline, and it's all IamGUI. I'll leave a description link in the description below where you can find the IamGUI plugin, and you can introduce it to your project. But what's cool about this one, I can pick my character, I can determine if it's going to be damage or healing, because I also have healing, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But we can have applied or received for damage. We can filter by damage type, so we can have physical, applied, and we see all these instances of damage that I just did to the enemy. And I know it's probably going to be really hard for you guys to see, so you might have to trust me on some of the data that's going to be passed in here. But you'll be able to see some context information about the damage. So you'll get information about the target, the tags that the target had at the time it was hit, the same thing for the instigator, the tags that were there when we were hit, the actual instigator character themselves, additional damage context tags, so like the damage type, and there's these flags that'll tell you if the damage was critical, or if it was damage over time effect, if it was resisted, because we do also want to provide damage immunity and resistance into the game, if it was a lifesteal mechanic for healing. And then we also introduce the modification values, and then when things are modified, you'll see the information that also modified the final damage. So for this critical hit, the base damage was 3, the modified was 3, and the final was 6. And what influenced that change from modified to final was the critical chance, which was 100%, and the critical damage multiplier, which was 1, which means it kind of more or less doubled. And you'll see that in all these cases. And then you can also draw debug shapes in the world for where these hits took place. So I'll draw a few and move some stuff around, and you'll see these are where the hits took place. And what's also cool is when you deal damage, so let's say that was the damage I just dealt, I could scroll all the way to the top because it's the last hit on top. You can then simulate that damage. So now you'll see the exact damage, same calculations, and of course you can simulate or filter out simulated damage here. So you can just damage it without it kind of populating the IamGUI if you want. And you'll be able to simulate the damage and kill the guy if you wanted to. And you can also do hit received. So if I were to receive damage or healing or anything, you'll be able to change the event type here. You could change the damage type if you want to filter for anything specific. You can filter critical hits only. It does a lot of cool stuff, and I'm really proud of this one. And just as a reminder, all of this information is available on my GitHub. I'm making the project open source in terms of code. The content and stuff, I get a lot of the content from Fab. So obviously I can't share that content explicitly with you guys, but the code you'll be able to see. Another aspect that I want to show you guys a little bit here is this other IamGUI for gameplay attributes. Like I mentioned at the top of the video, we use the gameplay ability system because it gives you things like attributes or stats, as well as means to do pretty extensive damage calculations and executions, which we'll jump into in a little bit here when we talk about critical chance and critical damage multipliers and stuff like that. But one thing I saw lacking with the gameplay ability system, and I'm not too sure why it doesn't exist, is the means to debug modify attributes. For those familiar with gameplay ability system plugin, you modify attributes typically from gameplay effects, but for debugging purposes, I would want there to be a more elegant way to be able to modify things at runtime without having to, explicitly make a gameplay effect at runtime, make the value, change the value, and do it like that. So it does give you hooks in code to modify attributes in a more simpler way without going through gameplay effects. But if you pay attention to the bottom left with my health, for example, right? So I have all my health attributes. My current health is 100. So I can set that to 50 now, and you'll see my health drops down to 50. I can bring it back up to 100. I can make my max health 200, and because I have the modification on clamping, when you make the max health, whenever there's a change with max health, the current health also adjusts to match it, at least in terms of ratio. So now if I make this 100, it's now 50%. We also have things like critical chance, critical damage multiplier. We could do incoming healing multipliers, these damage resistances, and all of that good stuff. So this is something that is super, super useful. We also have something like our card resources, which are these circles that you'll see above the character health. What I can do is make more. So if I make 10, the UI updates to show 10. I can then make 5 up here. I can then maybe even adjust the passive income gain. So I can make it like 50. And so now over time, I get more card resource, and you'll see it kind of responding to that. So this actual IMGUI debug for it saved me so much time trying to get that card resource UI to work, because I was able to then make modifications at runtime to see how the UI would react, to make sure that it reacted correctly. So this has also been a huge, huge, huge lifesaver. So that's most of the damage here. An additional thing I want to talk about is area of effect. So when I spawn, and let me get rid of the collision shapes just so I don't confuse myself. We have these enemies that shoot. Right now they're a healing area of effect, but you'll see it deals 12, and obviously the circle that represents the radius is not accurate, but you'll see it represents 12 healing, and I do get healed for that value. But what's interesting with my setup with area of effect, and I'll jump into one of my area effect data assets and just show you a little bit of my mindset with area of effect. So I believe I'm using test. Yeah, because it's healing. So a thing that we did, I believe on Outriders, I'm trying to remember, is the use of curve tables and damage fall off with curve tables. So you'll see we have a curve here that you can draw how the damage over time, not over time, damage over distance is modified, and you can do a min value and a max value. And there's also a can heal option, and you can also do a debug. So let me try to find the explicit one that I'm doing here, because I believe it's one of these. It must be area of effect. So for example, if I make the max value 100, and we make that writable, I'm curious if this will actually behave as I would want to hope, because maybe I got my values backwards, but we'll see. But I have a quick debug here to let me deal damage to myself. And now, let's get this guy's attention, so he'll shoot something at me. Let's see if I stand on the edge here. Yeah, I'm getting healed for 26. And now let me stand more in the center. Now we're getting healed for 46. So definitely some weird calculation I think is going on. I should be getting healed for the max value of 100, but maybe that's a bug for another day. But basically this is how we can kind of use area of effects. So I can draw affected actors, I can draw area of effect, and I can draw the numeric value as well. So when I play again, we should be able to see more information about this debug. So let's take a look. Let me just deal damage to myself a bunch. Let me get damaged, or healed, I should say. Yeah, we're seeing the entire range here. So I did get healed for 100, it seems. Oh, it's because I only had X amount to be healed with, so good to know. So yeah, area of effect is a pretty important thing. And just to kind of break down my mindset, just face to face with you guys. So area of effect, depending on your game, you might want to have different things with it. Like for very calculated gameplay, do you want to have variability of area of effect? So like if you stand just on the cusp or the edge, you barely get damaged, and then the closer you are to the epicenter, you get more damage. Is that the kind of game you want? Do you want that kind of variability, that unpredictability? Is that something you expect the player to kind of just recognize and get used to and hope for the best? Or do you want to just say, okay, everybody in this area of effect receives the same damage, receives the same gameplay effects, receives the same status effects, whatever the case might be? For my game, I'm thinking I want to have that fall off just to kind of give players... Oh, maybe just damage from enemies from the area of effect can be damage fall off for the player's benefit. And then any area of effect that the player doesn't have damage fall off, again, for the benefit of the player. That's kind of my mindset with this kind of game. because I want things to move pretty quickly. I want to benefit and be in the player's favor as much as possible, and area of effect is just one of the many ways, and damage pipeline reasons. Another aspect too, when you have area effect, depending on the type of game you're making too, if you want realistic or not, you might need to do some, target raycasting. So if you spawn something in the circle or sphere, and there's a guy behind a wall, do you want him to be a part of that area effect calculation? Should he be ignored? For my type of game, because it's this, isometric, top-down kind of game, and it's more arcadey, it's not going to be really required that any enemy will be behind such a wall. But, for maybe a story-driven game or just a more third-person 3D kind of game, you might want to have those calculations in place just so you don't, when an explosion happens, you don't get damage behind a wall or, deal damage to a person behind the wall. Especially for like multiplayer things too, you might want to do those raycasts in order to, I guess, more predictably affect targets with your area of effect. So yeah, that's most of the damage that I've been doing. We can also then jump into code just a little bit here. Let me jump into the other screen. So this is my damage execution class. It's pretty hefty, and again, those familiar with the gameplay ability system plugin, this is what you primarily use to modify incoming damage to get the final damage result, which is then applied to your target. So I can't dive too deeply into this. Again, everything is on GitHub, which I'll link in the description below, but more or less you capture all the attributes that you want to have take place, be used in the calculation. So we have the incoming damage, so the actual damage number being passed in. We have a critical chance, we have critical damage modifiers, damage multipliers, damage resistances, and then we do our typical safety checks here. We get all the source actors, we make sure they're all valid, we get the ability systems, we get the source tags, we store those into variables we can use later. Here is my damage log entry. This is the stuff for the IamGUI debug. This is how I kind of update the information as it's getting passed in through the pipeline. I use it as a context for my project. And then we start doing stuff. We get the base damage, we get it, we log it. We then do damage over time handling for when we want to do cached damage. So for example, the first instance of the damage over time, we want to say it's 3. And basically we use that cache damage for the rest of the time that the DOT is being applied. So for example, I don't know if this is going to be a use case for me, but maybe it will. And let me just show you my face again so you guys know I'm here. Say for example, you have an attribute that says, burn damage, incoming burning damage modifier, right? And say it's 1 all the time. And so when you deal burn damage, damage over time, it's 3, right? During that damage tick, if that enemy then gets a burn damage incoming burn damage multiplier of 2, would we expect that damage that's currently taking place for the burn to then be modified at runtime? I think that could be interesting. So maybe caching damage for the sake of damage over time is not the play. I'm curious what you guys think. I think it'd be kind of cool and kind of clever if, for example, you set a bunch of enemies on fire, everyone's burning, and then you draw a card that says, okay, all enemies receive double burn damage, and then you just play that card immediately and everyone starts taking double damage, and you just see a bunch of enemies burning and blowing up and whatever cascading effects could happen. I think that could actually be cool, so maybe I'll change that. Just let me know what you guys think as well. But yeah, let me jump back in. So yeah, we do a bunch of cache damage, so we just know, hey, just don't bother recalculating. Might change that based on my own external speaking here. But then we do crits and multipliers and resistances. So we grab our critical chance, we grab the critical damage multiplier, we do a random roll, and then we then, of course, if it's all Gucci, we then cache that information, say, hey, we just did critical damage. Let's store that. Let's put that into our context so we can draw that into our debug a little bit later. We get our damage multipliers, we modify things in that way, and then we do our resistances. And the way we're doing resistances, I can't really dig in too deeply because this video will be too long, I think. But I'll put a resource in the description of the video because there's a very good resource where you can use tags to basically modify resistances at runtime based on the damage type that you're dealing. So again, damage types will be very important for my project down the line. And then, of course, I check to see if the player is the source, and if the player is the source of the damage, we want to just round the value up, because right now a lot of damage calculations will be float values. So if we're dealing with float values, we'll get cases where, you know, my damage was 5.7, right? And so for the case of the player, I wanted, well, for both enemies and the player, I want to stick with round numbers for the sake of displaying health values and kind of make it understandable what's happening and make it clear to the player. So with that, any damage that the player does, I want to round up, and then any damage that the enemy does, I want to round down, again, for the benefit of the player, just to make them feel a little bit stronger, make it feel a little bit more safer, and things like that. And then I kind of do, I do the same, I guess I do the same, or I think it's the same for healing. So if the player were to receive healing, we would round it up, and if enemies receive healing, we round it down. Again, just benefiting the player. And who knows how readable this will all be in the long term, but that's what my idea is for damage and healing. And of course, we have lifesteal mechanics as well. So for example, if I jump back into the game here, you'll notice every time I deal damage to myself with my debug, you'll see a +2. That's lifesteal. So I have lifesteal mechanics. So if I open up my I am GUI debug here, gameplay attributes, grab the player, I think it's under health. I probably would need to separate it out to its own attribute set for these things, but there should be a all damage healing coefficient. So right now you're seeing it's 20%. So if I make that 1, aka 100%, I should be able to heal for all of my damage. Let me just, can I grab my mouse again? Oh no. Yeah, it's not giving me my mouse. Let's try that again. I promise it works. Oh yeah, it's tab. Okay, I'm stupid. So yeah, gameplay attributes, player, health, all damage healing coefficient if we make it 1. Debugs. Now I deal damage. Now I'm healing for everything. So again, that's going to be super useful, and I want to have that for the sake of the cards. And again, it all comes down to how these attributes kind of play with each other and how they play with the damage pipeline. Because again, I want these cards that the player can execute to be pretty flexible and pretty interesting to play off of each other. So having them be able to modify how damage is modified and calculated, how you can influence status effects, how you can influence status effect durations, how you can clear and make yourself immune to status effects. Maybe I'll make a whole different devlog video about that. But in general, I just wanted to give you guys a small glimpse into my thought process for damage. And again, damage and damage pipelines and hit reactions and hit pipelines can vary from project to project. It really just depends on how complicated your game wants to be. So again, for close-up games, like third-person action games, so if you think like God of War, Ghost of Tsushima, you might want to see more tightness in how the melee is executed. So you'll see that contact, you'll see the enemy hit react in the right way, make it look like clean cut. But for a game like this, or a game like Hades, or any top-down isometric thing, the exact impact position doesn't truly matter. The trace value or the trace shape and size that the player can do or the enemies can do kind of matter, but again, we want to favor the player, so we'll make theirs a little bit bigger, enemies a little bit smaller. But how we do damage calculations, how many stats are involved, that also just depends on the type of game you want to make. So if you need to have more defensive stats, if you need to have more offensive stats, if status effects are a thing, if you have lifesteal mechanics, how those play together, what your progression systems look like, how does damage evolve over time, how does your max health evolve over time. It all depends on that type of game that you want to make. So sorry if this, I rambled for this video. Hopefully you took out some good information. I'm still trying to learn how to do these devlogs in a way that makes it interesting for you guys while also showcasing the game. but also giving you a glimpse about how my mind works for this game and the experiences that I've had in the game industry so far when it comes to some of these topics, the things I kind of want to take away, things I kind of want to leave behind, and hopefully it gives you guys interest in my project as well. So if you're still here, thank you for watching. I appreciate it very much. Make sure to subscribe here. In the link in the description will be a link to our GitHub, so you can check out the project code if you wish. There'll also be a link to my Twitch. We stream a couple times a week, both to YouTube and Twitch. So make sure to follow, subscribe, whatever you need to do for those platforms. Any help growing is appreciated. We also have a Discord, speaking of which, definitely want to grow a community, not just around this game, but around Unreal Engine 5, the gameplay ability system plugin, just game development in general. If you're interested in Godot, if you're into Unity, doesn't matter. Definitely join the Discord, hang out, share your experience, ask your questions. Hopefully we can learn and grow together. So until next time, I'll see you later.